And your recording.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be with you here today. This talk is about a book. The title of the book is called Ethics in Finance, Case Studies from a Woman's Life on Wall Street. The book won 3 awards, as Raj has said, and the first award was a bronze medal from the Axiom Business Book Awards 2022, based in the US, and it was for the best business ethics book. The second award was the winner of the Business Book Awards in the UK for the best international business book. And finally, it was a finalist in the International Book Awards in the nonfiction narrative section. So I'm very grateful to have that, and I think I can retire now. So I wrote the book in 2020, and as you all might recall, that was not a very happy year for the whole world. We were all in lockdown. So what better thing to do at home than sit at your computer and write a book? So we were all isolating, we were all going a little crazy, and this book gave me the opportunity and the legitimacy to live in my own head, and to write stories was actually quite therapeutic. To be honest, I was isolating with my family, so it wasn't as difficult as it was for some other people. So what I'm going to tell you about the book falls into 3 broad categories. We are always talking 3s. So I can't promise I won't meander, but the first section will be about the approach of the book, or the shape of the book. The second section will be about the purpose of the book, or the why of the book. The third section will be about the contents of the book, or the what of the book. So let's talk about the shape of the book. The press release for the book says, the book recounts entertaining stories of an immigrant Asian American woman's journey through the top echelons of Wall Street. Well, the important word here is stories. And I love stories, especially science fiction stories. So generally, I would say all humans love stories. We've been telling stories to each other since we started talking to each other millennia ago. And the first thing we do when we have kids is we tell them stories from the time that they're babies, right? And we tell our children stories to teach, to entertain, and also to cajole. Now, in the old days, stories we told about morals and about how we should live a good life were called parables. But we live in the modern 21st century, so the word parables has been changed to case studies, because we live in the age of business. So there are parables from the very beginning, right? From every faith tradition. For instance, there's a very celebrated story, of course, about the Good Samaritan, which is told in the Christian tradition. And there is a less well-known story of the mustard seed, which is told in the Buddhist tradition. And the story tells of a mother who lost her young child to disease, and the child died really young. Of course, the mother was grief-stricken, so she went to the Buddha and said, Tathagata, which in Pali means roughly the perfect one. Can you please bring my child back to me? And the Buddha says, yes, but first, find me a mustard seed from a family or a household which has not suffered loss or suffered death. So the mother goes to countless houses over many days to ask for a mustard seed, but everyone in every household confesses that they have suffered loss and death. So after many days, the grieving mother has not obtained a single mustard seed. And she realizes the lesson that loss is part of life. So she buries her child and goes back to the Buddha and says, Tathagata, please teach me some more. And from that parable, we get a lesson in the first of the Four Noble Truths, which is a central tenet of Buddhist teaching. And it's the first noble truth about the reality of suffering. Now, as I've said, in modern parlance, parables have morphed into case studies. And in my book, following the trend of business, I have 10 case studies, but mostly these case studies are all experiences, are stories, and I use it as a way to engage the reader, to bring them in so that I can teach finance. Now, the stories I tell in the 10 case studies that are in the book are not mega dramatic stories. They're not like, oh my gosh, I stopped Bernie Madoff from his Ponzi scheme, or oh wow, I knew the CEO of Bear Stearns and I nearly stopped him from the collapse in 2008. No, those are very dramatic stories. The stories I tell are everyday stories, but stories that you and I face, and finance professionals face, and lawyers will face in their everyday work. Now, there are writers who write about grand gestures and dramatic events and larger than life human beings. And I would include in this group Dostoevsky. But then there are writers who delight in and linger on the small gestures, the small human gestures and occasions. And I would put in this category Leo Tolstoy. Now, Dostoevsky writes about murders and revolutions and the Grand Inquisitor, but Tolstoy writes about Anna Karenina and a small red bag over which she bends her flushed head to look into a bag in which she had placed a few cambric handkerchiefs and a lace nightcap. Now, why is this important? Because it is the same small red bag that she has with her when she jumps off the train platform onto an oncoming train 4.5 years later after we meet her. Now, I promise you that this is the last time I will speak about death. So I write about Christmas parties in corporate companies. I write about uncomfortable Sunday afternoon telephone calls with your boss. I write about conference meetings in windowless conference rooms. Yet these stories convey meaning, or at least I hope they do. So in sum, the book uses stories based from my experience on Wall Street and in finance to teach financial ethics. And it teaches about how to spot ethics issues, why a certain action is wrong, and what we can do, which is right. The why of the book. The 4 reasons I wrote the book are, first, for our daughter, because I wanted her to know what I was doing before her remarkable and amazing presence in our lives. And I wanted her to know what I was doing between serving her breakfast and cooking up dinner. Second, I wanted to help young people who were entering the finance industry to help them through everyday ethical issues, which they will face almost on day one in their job. I know this will surprise you, but financial ethics is not taught in many, or I'd say in the majority of business schools in this country. Third, I wanted to help just the general public to solve ethical problems using very, very approachable tools. It is not rocket science. And if you have the right tools, just like you have the right tools in law school, you will also be able to solve problems. When I go to conferences, financial ethics conferences, people usually come up to me. I'm often actually asked, but you can't teach ethics, can you? To which I then answer, so you just let your children grow up feral? You don't tell them from age 1, don't take, your brother's toys, don't slap your brother or don't slap your friend, because that is already teaching morals. So morals can be taught. So then they come back with their second objection after I say that. It's like, oh, but you can't teach morals in business after they've graduated and gone into business. Why would that happen? Why is it that after 22, you stop teaching morals, but you don't stop teaching everything else? Because when you teach morals, you're just teaching values, and values are non-quantitative. But you still teach a lot of value-laden topics. For instance, art appreciation, art history, very value-laden, but you feel you can still teach it. So these are some of the issues that come up because financial ethics, which is a new discipline which we're trying to promote, has not entered the consciousness of the general public yet. And fourthly, the purpose of the book is to help fulfill the mission of Seven Pillars Institute. Seven Pillars Institute, or SPI, was founded by me in 2010, 2 years after the great financial crisis. It is the world's only independent think tank for the research, education, and promotion of financial ethics. Now, this statement is our mission statement as well as our elevator pitch. And you'd be surprised how long it takes to come up with a short, pithy elevator speech. I mean, Churchill was said to have said, I'm sorry this speech was so long, I had no time to write a short speech. So SPI has a mission, the education, promotion, and research of financial ethics. But we also have a quest. Now, mission is kind of bland, it's corporate, every corporation has a mission. I'm sure KU Law has a mission statement. It tries not to be too controversial. But we also have a quest. Now, quest is cosmic. It's world-changing. So the quest, for instance, of the legendary pilgrimage in the Chinese classic Journey to the West has the monk Xuanzang traveling to the Western regions, which is Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent, with his helpers to find and obtain the Buddhist sacred text or sutra, to bring it back to China so he can spread Buddhism in China. That's a quest. And the quest of the fellowship in the Lord of the Rings. Has anyone been watching the prequel to the Lord of the Rings? Yes. But anyway, the quest of the fellowship is, of course, find the ring, destroy the ring. If you do not destroy the ring, evil wins over good and Middle Earth is trashed. So much rides on the quest. So what is SPI's quest? Our quest is to make ethics integral in the theory of finance. I know it might be shocking to hear, but right now finance theory has no space for ethics. It is completely devoid of ethics because it is finance theory as it stands now is a stepsister of economic theory, which right now in the ascendancy is neoliberal economics, which is Friedmanite economics, which is profit maximization is the key. So my theory is that where theory goes, practice follows. So you have to change the theory so that students who learn the theory go out on Wall Street and say, oh yeah, this is what happens when you have ethics in finance theory. So the what of the book. In writing this book, I wanted to make the book approachable and comprehensible to as many people as possible. I wanted it to reach a very wide audience. So you won't need a special knowledge of finance, and you won't need special knowledge of moral philosophy. And I think of my book as a cross between a memoir and an explainer. Now, what is an explainer? A good example of an explainer is Malcolm Gladwell, who writes great economic explanation books. And his very famous book, Outliers, the story of success, and the most remembered point in this book, because he keeps reiterating it, is the 10,000-hour rule. Now, this rule states, the key to achieving world-class expertise in any skill is to a large extent a matter of practicing the correct way for a total of 10,000 hours. So you can be an excellent lawyer if you practice for 10,000 hours. Now, this book itself was responsible for hundreds of thousands of parents pushing their poor children into practicing piano in the hope of Carnegie Hall. Yeah. So Gladwell makes psychology and economics accessible, and I want to do the same thing with financial ethics. So the point, kind of like the 10,000-hour rule, but not so succinct, to be remembered from my book is, don't beat yourself up trying to be ethically perfect. By which we mean we're not expected to be perfect in the practice of ethics. We are human and we live in a very messy world, but we are expected to try. And just because it is difficult, we are not expected to throw up our hands and give very lame excuses for not trying to be ethical. Now, over the past century, half century or so, we have kind of thrown up our hands and given up on ethics, especially in finance, because it's just too difficult. And by the way, it's not in finance theory. So a little bit about the term ethics while we're talking about it so much. What is ethics? Now, ethics derives from the term ethos, which is a Greek term, which means traditional practice. And morals derives from the Latin term mores, also denoting custom. Simply put, ethics used today means to do the right thing at the right time, for the right reason, in the right way. Now, I'll talk about the structure of each chapter of the book. They all have the same structure. First, there is the story, in which I recount a particular experience I've gone through. This is followed by ethics issue, in which we spot the ethics issue in the story. And then it's followed by ethics analysis, in which we try and understand why that particular action in the story is wrong. And this is concluded with right action, in which we try and suggest the right thing to do. So every case study goes through these 4 steps. And the book moves chronologically. Chapter 1 starts with my first job while I was still younger than you in Singapore, when I was fresh out of school, and subsequent stories follow my experiences as I journey through my finance career as an equity analyst, equity salesperson, mutual fund manager, hedge fund portfolio manager, investment consultant, and finally a lecturer in finance, and then a social entrepreneur. But you know, I have no case studies from that. So let's breeze through a case study, and I'll read an excerpt from each of the 4 sections I spoke about. Now, the story is in chapter 9. It's called The Gender Inequity in the Finance Academy case study, which I thought might be relevant here. So my last stop in my career highway was as a lecturer in the finance academy. And it was the land of political minefields. Because as I discovered about the academy. Now, Henry Kissinger once said, academic politics are so vicious precisely because the stakes are so small. I taught for a while in the finance department of let's call it a business school of a public university. So let's call it BSPU. I worked as a lecturer teaching financial ethics, as well as a course in financial careers. And I taught the financial ethics class to MBAs in a satellite location, and all my students were working and they were doing the MBA part-time. So of course, because of all those factors, my course was no threat to the faculty. Now, it so happens a couple of years later that the department of the business school went through BSPU, went through something horrible called curriculum reform, which, by the way, that is the minefield of political minefields if you ever enter the academy. But I was rather naive and I was enthusiastic, and I sent in a proposal to teach financial ethics to undergraduates because we had just come through 2008. There was so much greed, regulatory capture, and I thought this is what is needed right now in this moment in time. But to my astonishment, not only was the proposal shot down, but they also canceled my MBA class. Now, I would like to mention the composition of the finance faculty. There was not a single woman on tenure track in the faculty. The faculty contained about 20 men who were tenured or on tenure track, and 2 female lecturers, me being one of them and the other being on non-tenure track as well. So I asked the meeting to discuss my proposal and the cancellation of my MBA class. Let me read you excerpts now from the book. It is under the title, The Meeting. In preparing for this meeting, I drew on decades of experience arguing for and marketing my products or ideas to others, many of whom were men. For example, I sold top management at the mutual fund company in which I worked the concept of offering an emerging markets fund. This development was a multi-million-dollar undertaking involving multiple departments. I was put in charge of the endeavor after the president and chief financial officer both agreed to setting my idea into operation. Surely then, it was not a leap to think I could do a decent job persuading 15 or so academics on the worthiness of offering a financial ethics course after the worst financial crisis since the 1929 stock market crash. I was wrong. First, I underestimated the veracity of Kissinger's statement about small matters with low stakes taking on tremendous significance in academic politics. Second, I underestimated the degree of implicit bias male faculty in the Finance Academy harbor against women. The implicit bias was clear in the number of tenured or tenure-track women in the men hired. Did I mention the number was 0? The justification, the de facto alpha male, call him B, of the department expounded frequently at faculty meetings for this gender disparity was there were no women in the hiring pool who met the required criteria. In other words, the men in the hiring committee could find no qualified females to teach the desired type of finance. This sorry excuse for a lack of female representation in organizations is now regarded as lame and inexcusable. B spoke for the group in most meetings and considered himself as someone who, 1, upheld meritocracy, 2, succeeded by his own merit, and 3, in no way was sexist. He was a big man, arrogant, cruelly dismissive, and possessed ostensible certitude in his convictions. B virulently opposed my teaching a course in financial ethics and made that clear at the meeting, which sucked the life from my soul. The room I entered was windowless, lit by 2 long fluorescent light strips, and contained a rectangular, nondescript conference table around which sat 9 men and 1 woman. She who initially recruited me called her H. The non-tenured male faculty of the department did not think it politically wise to show up for this meeting. No need to jeopardize their tenure by supporting a female lecturer disliked by the tenured men. The atmosphere was thick with hostility when I entered the room. The men did not smile or greet me warmly, if even at all. H looked down at her notebook. It was evident the men had already made up their minds and resented my impudence to even call a meeting. Anger rose in me against injustice of this decision. Gamely, I made my presentation anyway, explaining all the reasons mentioned above, and then waited for the inevitable rejection. We don't agree with you that our finance program needs a course in financial ethics, and the MBAs have a mandatory course in business ethics anyway, squeaked one associate professor, B's minion. While B was tall, the minion was short, with sagging jowls and a pudgy figure. He leaned into the table, channeling up his best Sheryl Sandberg, stared mockingly at me, and attempted an imposing, intimidating stance. He made a surreptitious sidelong glance at B to confirm he had B's approval. The posturing and sycophancy was sad, and I rolled my eyes mentally. We all teach ethics in our courses. We have said that many times. We incorporate ethics in our lectures whenever it's appropriate. There's no need to take up a precious slot for your proposed course, said B in an overdone stentorian voice, wanting to project power, intellect, and authority. This statement implied he knew moral philosophy well enough to teach ethics. We don't think a course on financial ethics, such as yours, will benefit the students. Ethics is infused in all our classes, interjected an older man, close to retirement, who fancied himself a sagely senior authoritative presence, proving humans tend to have the best impressions of themselves. But his effective soothing tone was discordant with the hostility in the room. All the while, H remained silent, except for a deep sigh or two throughout the meeting. There would be no support from my fellow female. The men made more patronizing remarks and demonstrated ostentatious indifference to my responses. A couple of younger males made placating and anodyne statements in an attempt to show a little decency. Finally, I left the room infuriated and humiliated. The next day, I filed an official complaint to the university office that handled discrimination. So that is under the case study or the story section. Now we look at the ethics issue here, which is systemic gender discrimination and implicit bias. Increasing evidence shows much gender bias operates at the unconscious level. Even individuals who consciously reject gender norms tend to unconsciously evaluate women and men according to different criteria, and to expect members of each gender to do better in those respects traditionally associated with their gender. This stereotyping is called implicit bias. In the MIT study, women described a legacy of male chauvinism, much of it subconscious or preconscious, on the part of men, some of whom simply did not realize they were being patronizing or sexist. Looking back at the vitriolic resistance encountered when I proposed a new course, I now see the reaction was predictable. The curriculum is a crucial area where faculty exerts power over type, structure, and content of knowledge provided to students. Academics view the power over course offerings as a vital way to influence educational outcomes, and the power imbues them with a feeling of stature. Thus, the curriculum illustrates the way in which hegemonic definitions of education, culture, and knowledge are contested. Feminists have decoded these secret complicities between power and knowledge, identifying how power functions to determine what students had the opportunity to learn and what was forbidden them. At the BSPU Finance Department, a male-dominated faculty decided on what the curriculum would be, negating any input from women. In addition to financial ethics, I had suggested the following curriculum additions: microfinance, environmental, social, and governance investing, or ESG investing, Islamic finance. The men summarily dismissed all these new course suggestions without any discussion. So we have then issue spotted that it was systemic gender discrimination and implicit bias. So let's do an ethics analysis on why this kind of act or action is considered unethical. In chapter 5, we discussed at length why gender discrimination is unethical. All ethics frameworks for the analyses of gender discrimination demonstrate the act is wrong and provide reasons why gender discrimination is unethical. Here's a recap. Justice theory. Justice is giving each person her due, treating equals equally, and unequals unequally. There is no reason to not treat women equally to men. From an ethics point of view and from a justice theory point of view, equal opportunity is a moral right of all people. Duty-based or deontological ethics. According to Kant's framework of ethics, we must respect human beings as ends in themselves because every human being has dignity and is therefore deserving of respect. Respect for people means fair and equal treatment irrespective of gender. Natural law theory. The prime moral directive in natural law is, in short, do good, avoid evil. In modern secular parlance, the fundamental principle of natural law becomes do good, avoid harm. Applying the primary natural law principle to this case, we find not hiring women and not giving them equal resources and opportunities does not, one, do good, nor does the action, two, avoid harm. To do good would be to help women succeed and achieve their potential by allowing them a place at the table. Now, having analyzed why gender discrimination and implicit bias is wrong, we talk a little bit about right action and what I suggest should have been done. Ensuring the number of women in power positions reaches a critical mass rather than just one or two who become tokens in their work area remains a vital goal. Women should strive to form groups or associations in which they can discuss shared problems of discrimination and harassment. These groups also help women find workable solutions to gender discrimination. Without support and advice from other females and female mentors, women in the academy will likely prefer to not complain because they recognize there are negative repercussions for those who push for change. Women feel it is a balancing act to work for reform without making men feel threatened by change. Sometimes women decide that it's simply not worth the effort. Yet those of us who can and are willing to make the effort of speaking out should do so. Finally, remember Malcolm Gladwell and the memorable point in his book, which is the 10,000 hour rule. The point I would like to make to my readers is summed up in this passage, which I shall read and conclude this talk with. Just because we cannot be perfect in every decision involving an ethical issue does not mean we should give up trying to think about and then to do the right thing. We are called to try our best, but we are not expected to be right all the time. This book aims to be your guide in ethical thinking So your acts are ethical as far as you are able to.